Jai Baba, everyone. I'm going to give a presentation about how Meher Baba's messages on drugs during the 60s awakened a whole new generation of Baba lovers in the West. And what inspired me to do this was when I was reading Lord Meher during this period in the 60s, seeing how much importance Baba gave to this, how much importance he gave to this work on drugs, and also how proud he was of the guys who were doing this work in the West, primarily Allan Cohen, Rick Chapman, and Robert Dreyfuss. And it's also interesting that initially Baba stressed the importance of his giving out his warnings about the dangers of drugs, but then it transitioned and it became more about spreading his name and his message of love and truth. And as a result of that, it laid the foundation for a whole new generation of Baba lovers. And literally millions of people heard Baba's name and even saw his photograph during this time. So I'm going to tell this story through the lens of the individuals who were doing it. I'm going to play video clips and audio clips of the various players. And they were, in particular, Allan Cohen, Robert Dreyfuss, and Rick Chapman. Baba referred to them as his Baba boys, and he also referred to them as his apostle in this line of work. And through their efforts, as I said, they brought Baba's name to millions of people. So the other players, the other people who were involved in this were Tom Riley, who actually was the first to receive a message about the dangers of drugs from Baba, and Moshe I.V. Deuce, who was more behind the scenes, but very involved in motivating and making that this work was being carried out. And two other people who were involved were more prominent, more well-known, popular individuals. One was Richard Alpert, who later became Baba Ram Dass, wrote the book Be Here Now and spoke about Baba and spiritual types of things. And he was very instrumental in spreading Baba's name. And the rock star Peter Townsend, who we'll see wrote an article in Rolling Stone magazine where Baba's photographs were included, and I think other millions of people through that article also saw and learned about Meher Baba. So the story begins with Tom Riley. Tom met Meher Baba here at the center in 1958. Then he learned about the East-West Gathering, which was going to take place in Pune in 1962. He wanted to attend, but he decided he wouldn't travel with the rest of the group by plane. It was more expensive. He had a training and license as a seaman, so he decided he would travel overland and by boat. And while he was there, Baba gave him the first warning about drugs. And this is Tom telling us his experience.
In the artistic and intellectual community in Woodstock, hallucinogenic drugs were prevailing. You know, hashish, marijuana, opium. It was just there, and that was part of the process of living. That was just it. And I got quite involved, especially with hashish. The word came that there was going to be a darshan in the East-West Gathering was going to take place. Decided I'd go to New York, and I was going to get a ticket on an Italian liner going to Gibraltar. So Adele Walton, a Baba person from New York, heard about this and said, "Tom, please come for lunch." So I said, "That'd be wonderful. I'd love to have lunch with you." So I went to New York and got the ticket and came to Adele's for lunch. And after lunch, I just very naturally asked Adele if she'd like to have a little hashish. This is important, but I'm telling you. Did she care to have a little hashish? She was cool. She said, "Oh, I don't think so, Tom, not right now." And I thought, "Oh, that's right. It's the middle of the day, and she's got a lot to do." Understood. So, as soon as Tom left, all the sirens went off, and she wrote a letter to Dr. Goher, who was a close friend of hers and a Mondali of Meher Baba's, living at Maryland. See, this was 2 weeks before the program. And I looked toward the doors, and Baba was sitting there in a rather simple chair. And I could see that lots of men were seated on oriental rugs on the floor. And I walked over to him, and as I approached him, he was absolutely beside himself with joy at seeing me. He was almost wiggling in his chair. He was so overwhelmed with the fact that I had arrived there, and he was so thrilled to see me. The first thing he said was, "You have no idea how blessed you are today. You have broken the ice for the East-West gathering." All of a sudden in the back, somebody, some hysteric in the back says, loudly, out of the silence, says, "Baba, ask him if he smokes." And Baba, it was pure theater. Baba looked at him and looked at me, and as though to say, "That's a very peculiar question. Do you smoke?" "Well, I'll accommodate him. You know, he's asked me, I don't know why, but do you smoke?" Like this. And I thought, well, I did not smoke cigarettes. But once in a while, if there was no hash around, someone would hand me a cigarette, and I'd smoke, and it was enough for me to legitimately say, occasionally. So if I didn't want to get into the drug thing, so I said occasionally. Then the hysteric in the back says, "No, Baba, ask him what he smokes." And again, Baba's looking and said, "This is getting out of hand. I don't know what he's talking about." But, there he goes again. And, well, I'll just, can you answer it for him? What do you smoke? And I said, "Hemp." Oh, and there was chaos in the whole place, absolute chaos like this. And Baba, talk about the response and how obedience works with the Mandali. Baba just went like this, and it was silence, just absolute silence like that. And all Baba said was, "It's best if you don't smoke anymore. Smoking is very bad for you." And since that moment, I never took any kind of drug again. Even though when I got back, people I knew quite well putting bricks of hash in my pocket and so on, and saying, "Tom, we know Baba's a great guru. Nobody's questioning that, but he's never tried it." So later, Baba wrote a letter and said, "Nothing whatsoever to do with people who take drugs. Stay away from them. Have nothing whatsoever to do with them." And then Rick Chapman came back in 1967 and visited us in Woodstock and said, Baba said, "The most important work you can do at this time is to tell young people, anybody you encounter, to steer clear of drugs. They're harmful mentally, spiritually, physically. That's the most important work you can do."
So after Tom returned from India with this warning from Baba, a couple years later, now 1964, he's living in Woodstock, New York, and he and Lynott, the artist who painted many painted many pictures of Baba, decided to give a talk, and they must have informed Baba because Baba specified that Darwin Shaw should come and be the speaker. And they were having this meeting, and they were going to invite people from this retreat, as well as other people, a retreat in Milford, New York, where the leading revolutionaries, experimenters in LSD were living for a summer and using the place as a setting to experiment with LSD. It was I think a DuPont family member's estate, and they made it available to this group of people. And the people who were there were the LSD gurus, Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, who we saw later became Baba Ram Dass. They were professors at Harvard, and they were first just experimenting with LSD, then they became, quote, the LSD gurus that spread the awareness of LSD throughout the country. And one of their students was Allan Cohen. And of course, Allan plays a key role in the spreading of Baba's messages. So while they were there, Darwin spoke, and they were so impressed by Darwin, they assumed that he must be high on some drug. And after the meeting, Allan read one of Baba's books, and this is Allan describing that experience of being in that meeting.
It led to a 2-year, relatively drama-filled period in which we experimented with these materials. It was true that a lot of the people associated with this group felt that something had been discovered. And the newest models were spiritual models. We began to read things from the East. We had visiting yogis. We had people come in who knew the Tao Te Ching and who knew other things. And because we had, of course, discovered the American quick way to do this. The folks had invited the psychedelic community up to Woodstock to see films of a holy man. Well, I wasn't into holy men, particularly. But I didn't want to be alone much either, so I went with the group. And in fact, in Woodstock, New York, yes, the films were this Meher Baba film. And who was there? Great New York, legendary figures, including Fred and Ella Winterfeld, including the Otts, Lindenfelds, including the Rileys, and including the speaker who was going to accompany the film. It didn't start out too auspiciously. He was introduced as a traffic engineer from Schenectady. He wore a jacket and a tie, and his other qualification was he was some kind of official of the Episcopal Church there in Schenectady. This was not what we would regard as, quotes, hip. Well, Darwin got up to talk. And son of a gun, we're getting back to theme now. Son of a gun, something was strange about this guy. He was talking, he was really straight. He was talking about things about this man I didn't much understand. But I was looking at him, he's high. But there was some glow or something. There was some kind of energy that was happening.
Yes.
That was strong enough to make us very curious.
Wow.
I'll come back to this thing. And in fact, even Leary went up afterwards and talked with him a little bit. And I was browsing there's a little table with books on it. And I saw this little book, and I picked it up. And we have been reading really voluminously in Eastern mysticism to prepare for our psychedelic experiments. And this little book called Sparks, and I looked inside it. And there were little one-liners, little paragraphs, and I've seen this little baby book. Right on. Look at this. This cat is summarizing hundreds of pages here. So in the style of the time, I stole the book. LSD, I decided to take LSD and take the discourses with me on a little picnic on a hill. A very nice day. I was about halfway through, and I was kind of reading, and I actually did start reading. I got to a place called, it was part of a meditation, the journey of the soul to the oversoul. All right? I read it. And as I read it, I understood it. I understood it completely. And then when he got to talk about the planes, he got to the sixth plane, seeing God everywhere and everything. I said, I'm there! I had the experience of seeing God everywhere, and quite convinced that I occupied the sixth plane. In fact, that conviction made me feel very guilty that there are all these Meher Baba people out there, probably I'd met very much, who could get to the sixth plane in a couple of hours and don't know how to do it. And it should be very useful to let them know. She generated a letter to Kitty Davy that set out scientific and reasonable way exactly what you should do.
So Allan wrote a letter to the center, as he said, in 1964, and explaining this experience that he had on LSD and reading Baba's discourses. He was convinced, as he said, that he was on a higher plane of consciousness. Allan was very gracious in preparation for my presentation. He made available all the correspondence he had between himself and Baba. And he also recorded this letter, which he sent to Kitty Davy. Kitty, not knowing what to do with it, eventually sent it on to Baba. So here's Allan reading that letter.
It was delightful, ecstatic, and as close to God realization as my consciousness, it was no longer I, of course, that is, my ego can remember. Now, I really can't judge what level the experience was at, but afterwards it sounded much the same as the soul facing the infinite, while still considering itself finite. Now, about these psychedelic, mind-changing drugs such as LSD, mescaline, and psilocybin, I don't know if you are acquainted with them, their effects, or the controversy surrounding them. I know I would never have seen Meher Baba if it were not for my work with these drugs. They allow an indefinite period of superconsciousness, expanded consciousness, ego death, and so on. Not automatically, of course, but with the right set and setting. Although the drugs are used in psychotherapeutic, educational, and downright low-level contexts, it is beginning to be clear to me that their most appropriate use is in attaining spiritual freedom, or at least helping one to see the path. I get the feeling also that the existence of these drugs, actually natural chemicals found in common plants, is not a random occurrence, and their increased impact may well be a significant step in loosening up our distorted culture at worst, and in increasing the drive toward spiritual freedom at best. In my reasonably humble opinion, though, the feasibility of this type of experience is one of the most exciting prospects in freeing oneself and man, concomitant with the path of love and service, of course. One might liken it to a technique, such as meditation, which can break through our ego's games and traps extremely efficiently.
Okay, so when Kitty received the letter, she, not knowing much about LSD, if anything, had no idea how to respond to it. She sent the letter on to Baba, and Baba wrote quite a beautiful letter back to Allan. I'm going to read just a part of it. Baba said, all so-called spiritual experiences generated by taking mind-changing drugs are superficial and add enormously to one's addiction to the deceptions of illusion, which is but the shadow of reality. The experience of a semblance of freedom that these drugs may temporarily give to one is in actuality a milestone around the aspirant's neck in his efforts towards emancipation from the rounds of births and deaths. There is no drug that can promote the aspirant's progress or ever alleviate the sufferings of separation from his beloved God. Love is the only propeller and the only remedy. The aspirant should love God with all his heart until he forgets himself and recognizes his beloved in himself and in others. When you study the book God Speaks, you will understand how very impossible it is for an aspirant to realize God without the grace of the perfect master, and therefore it is paramount importance for a genuine spiritual aspirant to surrender himself to the perfect master who has himself realized God. So it turned out that Rick Chapman and Robert Dreyfuss, who were friends, had also met Allan Cohen, I believe at a Gurdjieff meeting or meetings in the past. And one day they went to visit Allan at his office at Harvard University, where he was getting his PhD, as I said, under the direction of Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert. And while they were there, they saw a photograph of Meher Baba. Turned out Robert had seen a photograph of Baba in a slideshow, some sort of multimedia slideshow, and Rex asked Allan, who is that? And Allan explained to them who Meher Baba was, and they got interested, and they decided to learn more, and they began to read Baba's discourses, his biography, God Speaks, and so on. And a couple months later, they came back together, and they said to each other, he's the one we're looking for. So now the three of them were all focused on Meher Baba. And at this time, an announcement had come, now in 1965, that there's going to be a Sahavis in Pune, and that the Westerners were invited to attend. That turned out to change. The Western part was canceled, but Robert Dreyfuss decided he wanted to go to India for that gathering. And he also decided he didn't want to just go to India for 2 weeks. He was a young person, 23 some years old maybe. He wanted to go to India and spend months there if he was going to go to India. So he decided, like Tom, not to travel with all the groups that were going to fly over. He went overland. And as he was traveling overland, the Sahavis for the Westerners got canceled, but he was out of communication. Didn't realize that until he got back. Until he arrived in Pune, and then fortunately he was encouraged to go on to Nagar and perhaps to meet Baba. So Robert was a great storyteller. There's many videos you can hear him telling his story. He also wrote a book about his many travels and his meeting with Baba. And so this is Robert telling this story.
And I was there for a couple of minutes when a quiet, soft-spoken, gentle man came and sat down next to me and said, "Hello, my name is Erich. What brings you to this bench?" And so I told him the story of how I came to be sitting on that bench. He had some papers in his hand. He listened very quietly. He said, "You sit here." I said, "I'll be right back. I have some work I'm bringing to Baba." And so he left, and I sat there for a few minutes, and he came back with a big smile on his face. And he said, "I have wonderful news for you." He said, "Baba will see you in the morning. He wants you to stay here tonight and sleep in the blue bus." So I was, of course, thrilled. And when Baba was in seclusion, of course, the Mandali were in seclusion. So a visitor coming was an event. And was brought over to Erich's cabin, and several of the Mandali came over to see who this person was. And I remember Bauji, who was then 39, if you can believe it. Shows how much time has passed. And meeting Rano and Goher and Mani and Baidul and Francis and so many others. We're all crowded in Erich's cabin, and they're asking me how I learned of their beloved. So I told them my story. And when I mentioned Allan Cohen's name, Erich said, "Oh yes, we just got a letter from him." And he ran off and he came back with the letter and read it aloud. It was a letter that Allan had written from Millbrook when he was on LSD, saying that here he was on the sixth plane. And wasn't it wonderful? And how did LSD fit into spirituality and consciousness? A letter which he sent to Kitty Davy, who had no idea how to respond to it, and she has sent it on to Erich. So Erich looked at me and says, "You know what this LSD stuff is?" I said, "Yes." "Have you taken it?" I said, "Yes." I said, "But what is it like?" And I had this mental image of a large karmic snowball rolling downhill, about to engulf me. So I explained that, being very clear, this was my own subjective experience. I mentioned that about everything, pulsating with consciousness and feeling of oneness with everything and all this, and that in Boston, where I had been from, that we used to call them reality capsules. At which point, Goher in particular cracked up laughing. These people had spent their entire adult lives, 50 years or more, with Baba, serving his every need and every order. And in the West, we had discovered a pill that could give you consciousness of oneness in 20 minutes. And she kept saying, "Only in the West, only in the West." So it was at this point, though I hadn't noticed, Erich had stepped out and he stepped back in, and he looked at me very innocently, and he asked me, "Baba wants to know if you'd like to see him now." As if I'd say no, I'll wait till tomorrow. So he took me around the men's side, over behind the small house where Mani's office was, and around to Baba's bedroom door. And the door was open, and he took me to the bottom of the 3 stairs, and Baba was seated on his bed with his sadra down to his waist. It was hot. There were a couple of other people in the room, though I have no memory of who they were. And I just stood there, and I was overwhelmed. Baba was just beaming at me. And all I could see when I looked at him was an effulgence emanating from him, a light so intense and so brilliant that it brought a physiological response of tears streaming down my cheeks in response to the brilliance of the light, with his face at the center beaming. And Erich was standing by my side, and Baba started to gesture. And Baba gestured, "I am happy to see you." I remember with what little of my mind was left working, he's happy to see me. He said that I looked tired and dusty, that I should have a hot bath, read a specific section of God Speaks that afternoon before the sun set, a section on Fana and Baka, have a good dinner, get a good night's sleep in the blue bus, and he would see me in the morning. Then Baba face grew serious, and he gestured. He said, "Are many young people in the West taking drugs?" And I said, "Yes, Baba, many." Of course, it was the tip of the iceberg then. And he said, drugs are harmful mentally, physically, and spiritually, which had great impact on me. I mean, it was obvious they could be harmful physically and mentally, but it was at a crisis in world affairs and a lot of uncertainty, and so who cared? But when Baba said they were harmful spiritually, it made a great, great impact on me. He said the drugs were delusion within illusion. And referring to, particularly in LSD, that if God can be found in a pill, God is not worthy of being God. He said many people in India smoke charas, hash, and ganja, and they see visions and have experiences, and nothing changes. All their problems are waiting for them, unsolved. And he looked at me very sternly and gestured, if his silence could be put in capitals, underlined with exclamation points, it was no drugs. Then Baba gestured that I should go back to the West and spread his message about drugs to the young people here. And I remember feeling horrified at the thought. I had this vision of standing in the hate on a soapbox saying, Meher Baba says, no drugs. Fortunately, it worked out a little more subtly than that.
So the next person in this chain of connections, right? We've gone from Tom Rowley, and then organizing the meeting, and then Allan learns about Baba, the meeting in Woodstock, and then Rick and Robert learn from Allan, and Richard Alpert also happens to learn about Baba at that Woodstock meeting, and then he learns, I think from Allan, that Baba says not to use drugs. This is after Robert comes back and really delivers that important message from Baba, affirmatively stating no drugs. So Richard Alpert was confused, and he called Robert and wanted to clarify, is this really what Meher Baba said? And Richard Alpert just couldn't reconcile the fact that Baba, who he now has come to recognize as a spiritual authority, would speak out against drugs, which was actually the means that Richard Alpert found and believed in this reality that was beyond normal consciousness, the spiritual reality, the spiritual domain. So he asked Robert, is this true? And Robert said, yes. Baba said, no drugs. So here's Richard Alpert, a recording of him talking about that experience that he had back at that time.
There was a very subtle quality, a problem involved in here, and it had been pointed out to me by none other than an Eastern mystic by the name of Meher Baba, who during a period of time I had become very devoted to. So I wrote Meher Baba a letter. It's a strange thing to write a letter to somebody who says, I am God, I am the avatar, but I took courage in hand, and I wrote and I said, Meher Baba, here is my problem, which you undoubtedly already know, but I will tell it to you on paper anyway. I read your books, and they all speak to me from way inside myself. I know they're all true. It all feels absolutely right. The only reason I know that is because of these drugs. Therefore, how can I, with any integrity, put them down, since they brought me to you? Would you please tell me how to do this? So he wrote back, and he said, in effect.
So here's the actual part of the actual letter that Richard Alpert wrote to Baba. He said, inside of me, I feel that LSD has been a major influence in my own life of a positive nature, and that the work I have been doing in the United States is humanly good. I also hear your message and understand that you probably do know. At first, I entertained the possibility that you did not understand that LSD is quite different and in fact quite opposite from the opium derivatives. But reflection and communing with you via your written word has failed to support my initial reaction. Thus at present, I feel you do understand. I should like to understand. Can you help me? Baba sent back a telegram saying, your letter made me happy. I know you are a sincere seeker of truth. My love will help you. My love blessing to you and those with you. Letter follows, Meher Baba. So Baba wrote back to Richard Alpert, and this is part of the letter. I believe it's through Adi. Meher Baba said to tell you that he knows everything. He knows LSD is different from the opium derivatives, and although you will see from the body of this letter that Meher Baba does not countenance drug taking for spiritual experiences, he says that you can, if you want, take LSD 3 more times, and then you should stop taking it completely. No drug, whatever its great promise, can help one to attain the spiritual goal. There is no shortcut to the goal except through the grace of a perfect master. And drugs, LSD more than others, give a semblance of spiritual experience, a glimpse of the false reality. The experience you elaborate in your letter and book are as far removed from reality as is a mirage from water. No matter how much you pursue the mirage, you will never reach water, and the search for God through drugs must end in disillusionment. Meher Baba, who knows the way, who is the way, cannot approve continued pursuance of a method that not only must prove fruitless, but leads away from the path that leads to reality. To a few sincere seekers, such as yourself, LSD may have served as a means to arouse that spiritual longing, which has brought you into contact with Meher Baba. But once that purpose is served, further ingestion would not only be harmful, but have no point or purpose. Now, your longing for reality cannot be sustained by further use of drugs, but only by your own love for the perfect master, which is a reflection of his love for you. Adi Kayarvani. So, it turns out Richard Alpert continued to respect Meher Baba for the rest of his life, but he eventually found his own master, Neem Koli Baba, when he went to India. And he didn't follow Baba's instructions of only taking LSD 3 more times. And eventually Baba instructed others to stay away from Richard Alpert. But as I say, the people know him so that he continued to respect and love Baba throughout his lifetime. And as we'll see later, played a significant role in spreading Baba's name and message. So a key turning point was a letter that Murshida Ivy Deuce sent to Baba in April of 1966. And what she had sent Baba was a clipping from an article in the New York Times about the dangers of drugs. And it says in that article that the federal government sent a letter to 2,000 colleges, in a stern letter to officials of more than 2,000 colleges and universities. Dr. James Goodard, Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, noted a marked increase in the illegal use of such drugs and said that concerted action must be taken. Otherwise, he warned, as an untold number of our students may suffer permanent mental or physical injury. So when Baba received that, he wrote back to Ivy Deuce, again through Adi. After hearing the article, Baba wishes me to let you and those concerned know that if the student world continues to indulge in the use of LSD, half of the USA would soon become mentally deranged. Hence, a check must be strictly enforced, and the use of these drugs be prohibited, especially among the rising generation. Of course, the law of the land will take care of this side of the question, but Baba wishes Robert Dreyfuss, Allan Cohen, Rick Chapman, and his others who have stopped taking LSD and such drugs to be his apostles in this particular field and to give lectures on college campuses and speak in social gatherings and meetings quoting passages from God Speaks and other Baba literature on the experiences of the spiritual planes, and reading excerpts from letters from Baba to Dr. Richard Alpert and Allan Cohen, in which beloved Baba is emphatically against the use of LSD and ganja, which is marijuana, and such like drugs and smokes. Meher Baba wants these Baba boys further to submit articles in newspapers against the use of these drugs, as based on information from Avatar Meher Baba and from his writings in the discourses, God Speaks, and so forth. Baba says that this is the best opportunity for Baba boys to do his work in the States and at the same time to be of help of others to their fellow beings in America. Their speeches and articles should be illuminating so as to turn the minds of the addicts and guide them to a proper understanding. Baba wishes his boys, particularly to tell students to read God Speaks, in which even the experiences of the planes of consciousness are only another kind of an illusion. Dear Ivy, it is expedient that these boys of Baba follow in the right earnest Baba's wishes and do their best to bring home his messages for the benefit of all concerned. With love to you and all dear ones, Adi K. Irani. This letter really ignited the work, and they began in earnest to do as Baba wished, particularly Allan, but Rick and Robert as well. So here's this picture of the three Baba boys back in, I think that's 66. The three of them, the three Boston Baba boys. So they did as Baba asked. They began to write articles. Here, one article in the Harvard Crimson, the Harvard newspaper that Allan wrote, and another one he wrote to the National Association of Student Personnel Administrators, giving the messages about the dangers of LSD and quoting Baba in the process. They also went to many college campuses and gave talks. I know quite a few Baba lovers at that time who became Baba lovers at that time who heard Allan or Rick speaking on different college campuses. And they also went on TV shows and radio shows. They were on the David Susskind show in 1968. And that's how I, as a senior in high school, learned about Baba. And they were on the Joe Pine show, I think a year prior to that. And they were actually treated very well by Joe Pine, who was known for being kind of vicious with his guests. He kind of really respected Rick and Allan, who were on together. And the show, I think, was at least a half an hour long of them speaking, and it's actually quite an amazing thing to watch. And at the same time, the Sufis created, under Ivy's direction, a pamphlet called God in a Pill, which had the different quotes of Baba from the letters that he'd written, and excerpts from the discourses in God Speaks as well, quotes of Baba's, and that became quite popular. I remember seeing one when I was in college. It was someone had a copy. I don't think they became a Baba lover, but somehow they had a copy of this. So they talked about the warnings of drugs. They cited Baba as their authoritative source, and as a result, millions of people would hear their name. Just the Joe Pine show itself probably had 1 million or more viewers at that time. So during this time, which was the latter part of Baba's advent, from 66 to 69, January 69, Baba really put tremendous importance on spreading his message on the dangers of drugs. And in a way, it became one of his major focuses during the last 2.5 years of his advent. And even in his deepest seclusion, he wanted to remain attentive to the work and hear from them what was happening. As we've seen, Baba referred to them as their apostles, as Baba's apostles in this work. So as a result, a whole new generation of younger Baba lovers came to Baba, and the many letters and cables that Baba had going back and forth, where he really placed, you see how much importance he gave to the work, and also how proud he was of the work they were doing. So I'm going to share some of the correspondence. There's a lot more, but I'll share some of it to indicate how much attention Baba was giving to it. Allan wrote this to Monty. Unquestionably, Baba's tempo in the U.S. is speeding up spectacularly. Word of the beloved has quickened the hearts of many who have been yearning for they knew not what. He seems to be reaping a harvest of ripe souls with the ancient tools of love and inspiration. So here's a cable that Baba sent to Allan in April of 67. Your letter to Adi, April 4th, and the enclosures being Baba work reports were read to me. I am very happy that you and Baba boys and girls are vigorously carrying out my message to people through articles, speeches, panels, radio appearances, and film media. I am with you. Baba would often in this correspondence express how proud he was of the work these boys were doing. In July 67, he said, I have seen LSD and the student, that's that article we saw earlier that Allan Cohen wrote, and have heard your July 10th letter to Adi. I am very happy at your response to my call to accelerate effort, for the time is fast approaching, and I am proud of you, Rick, Bob, and Baba boys and girls. My love blessings to you all. So we see here that Baba is beginning to hint that his time is fast approaching. He'll be dropping his body in a year and a half, and he's expressing how proud he is of the work that these guys are doing. In another telegram, 67 of May 67, he says, your cable and letter to Adi received. Spend no more time contacting Albert. Rick will soon join you in the work of spreading my message. Press on with this work, for my time is fast approaching. My love to you, Meher Baba. So here we see Baba is directing Allan, Rick, and Robert to cut off any connection they have to Richard Alpert, presumably because he had continued to experiment with LSD. And again, expressing, his time is fast approaching, hinting at that. So Rick met Baba, I believe it was in 67. He was a Fulbright scholar and had spent, I think, a year in India teaching English in a high school, and wasn't expecting to meet Baba. He wanted to go to meet other Baba lovers and be in India to have that opportunity. But Baba called him, and he was able to meet Baba at Mirzad. And afterwards, Rick sent a letter to Allan, and in the letter he says, before I left Pune, Baba sent me a message which contained immense emotional charge. And Baba said, you, Allan, and Bob are the ones who can spread my message of truth to the Americans. So here's another telegram to Allan. Your letters of the 15th and 16th November are enclosures. Read to Baba, and Baba says he is proud of you and your love. Baba sends love to you, Rick, and Bob. Erich. Another telegram now in 68, less than a year before Baba drops the body. He writes to Allan, in the midst of my seclusion work, I had Erich read out today your work report, including April 12th and 14th. I am very happy with the work done and want you to remember that under no circumstances can truth ever let down truth. Meher Baba. So Allan traveled to London and met with Baba lovers there. And while he was there, as you see, he met with Peter Townsend. And Baba wrote back a telegram to Allan saying, Avatar Meher Baba says he's very happy you are proclaiming his message of love in England through talks, television, radio. Baba sends his love blessing to you and says he is with you. Erich. So, as an indication of how much importance Baba was giving to this work, you can see that when he went into seclusion, he told his Mandali that he didn't want to have any intrusion into his seclusion. He said, from the July 21st to 21st November, I will be a much stricter seclusion. The time for my manifestation is drawing very close, and my universal work is greatly intensified proportionately. I have very serious seclusion work to do, and during that time, I should not be disturbed in the least. I will not attend to any correspondence during these 4 months, even emergencies. However, he says, none of the Mandalis should disturb Baba until November, and with any sort of correspondence or news received through telegrams, however important the letters or telegrams may be, except important letters which are received from Rani, the Maharani, who lent Baba her Guru Prasad Palace in Pune, when Baba was there in the months of, March through June. Nariman, Don Stevens, Allan Cohen, Rick Chapman, Robert Dreyfuss, and Louis Van Gasteren, and these letters to be read to Baba only on Saturdays at 9 a.m. So we see how much importance Baba gave to correspondence between these three guys and the work, the drug work they were doing. They were the few who Baba would allow correspondence to be read to him. So Baba at times also expressed to his Indian followers how proud he was of the work these guys were doing. In November 1967, Baba said to an Ahmadnagar group of Baba lovers, "In America, many, many new lovers are coming to me, and they too are active in my cause. Highly educated youths like Allan Cohen, Rick Chapman, and Robert Dreyfuss are always busy with my work there. Rick and Allan appeared on a nationally syndicated radio and television show, the Joe Pine Show, in August, and spoke about me to millions of listeners and viewers. Bill LePage has done the same thing in Australia and writes that the response has been tremendous. And here you are. You don't do anything." Baba liked to chide his lovers. So we see Baba expressing how proud he is of these guys doing the work, and also how it shifts from spreading his message about the dangers of drugs to spreading his name and his messages of love. Baba also said in October 1968, just a few months before he dropped the body, to another group of his lovers, I think this was from a group of Pune lovers that came to Mirzad, "These days, student riots are common all over colleges. Similarly, my name is causing a riot of love among students. Many workers experience that even before they knock at the door opens to my love. Workers in the West themselves arrange appearances on the radio and television and other programs to speak about me." Baba asked them, "Have you heard of Dr. Allan Cohen? Allan is a fiery worker. He's an assistant professor of psychology at John F. Kennedy University in California. He has even traveled to England to give talks about me, although he has not yet met me." So again, we see Baba expressing how proud he is. He's like a proud father talking about the guys doing this work for him. So to kind of understand and have what was happening at that time in America particularly, but in the West in general, this gives us the backdrop to understand how Baba's messages were so important and in relationship to the events that were happening. Primarily, with the younger people, was the formation of what was then known as the counterculture. It was a countercultural revolution. And basically, the counterculture was kind of a new way of living envisioned by a younger generation. And it changed everything from how people dressed, how long their hair was. People, guys began wearing long hair. The LSD was a very important part of this counterculture, as were other drugs. People were having experiences that were perceived as being spiritual experiences. Timothy Leary, who was the LSD guru, was going around the country telling people to tune in, turn on, and drop out. Tune into his message turn on by taking LSD or other drugs, and then drop out of the established way of living. We called the establishment back then, to drop out of school, drop out of work, drop out of life as we knew it, and to live this new countercultural type of life. The hippies were the main symbol of this type of life, or the people who were really attempting to live this utopian vision. And what the hippies believed in was peace and love and experience through drugs. And they were dropouts, and they were living this new extreme form of utopian life, or at least trying to live it. And at that time, there were various types of large gatherings of people. Like there was the Summer of Love in 1967, where about 100,000 people descended on San Francisco, all connected to the counterculture. There was rock music, there was drugs, and it was the beginning of this whole big counterculture that swept across the country. And a few years later, in Woodstock, 6 months after Baba dropped the body, was this Woodstock Music Festival, where 500,000 people came to this farm in upstate New York, where many rock and roll bands, very well-known rock and roll stars and bands, performed. And of course, there were a lot of drugs there at the same time. And again, it was a new phenomenon that was taking place in the country. And at the Woodstock Festival, Baba was present. There was a booth set up by some Baba lovers where they were passing out literature, Baba cards, and the like. And the other thing that was happening during this time was there was various protests happening. There was the Vietnam War protests. There was also protests against prejudice in the country. Martin Luther King had led the March on Washington a few years before this. He was assassinated. President Kennedy had been assassinated. Robert Kennedy had been assassinated. It was a very turbulent time, and all of this change was happening just prior to Baba dropping the body. And also, there was a shift. A lot of the younger people were moving away from their traditional religions and becoming interested in Eastern religions, primarily propelled by having taken drugs and having experiences that couldn't be explained through traditional Western religions, but where it could be explained through Eastern religions. And even that was discovered way back a few years earlier by Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, who became very interested in Eastern religions because of all the drug experimentation they had been doing. And here we see even the Beatles, who were extremely popular at the time, they had gone to India to study transcendental meditation with a Maharishi. So this was the backdrop to the work that Baba had these three guys and other people as well do in the United States. So to get a sense of what was actually happening at the time, Rick Chapman gave a talk about that here at one of the first Usahavises back in 1995. And he also has written a book. What's it called? Drug Consciousness, Bug Consciousness, Drug Consciousness, and Flying Carpets Consciousness. And he kind of gives a history of that period, and that, of course, that he lived through. And it's a very good source for all this material and to understand what was happening. So here's a video of him speaking here in the meeting place to a group of young people at the Usahavis, describing what was happening in the 60s and how Baba's work was so important to that.
Pot was, while ancient, was a newly discovered event, and school kids were turning on, and this was a big deal. And Tim Leary experimented with LSD, and I'm telling you all this because it is an essential part of the 60s, an essential part of understanding the 60s and of understanding how Meher Baba used drugs and the phenomenon of drugs to introduce himself to the West in the 60s. As the 60s reached their midpoint, Tim Leary and Richard Alpert at Harvard University, both professors at the time, had really discovered this incredible idea to them that by using what was then a kind of illegal, but it was hardly known enough to be illegal drug called LSD, idea that these changed consciousness was so dramatic. And changed consciousness, these guys were also students of mysticism, so they were reading Tibetan and Buddhist works and turning on and seeing all kinds of things changing shape and forms and figures sliding in and out of their consciousness, and the world melting out from underneath them, and feeling as if they could live forever and they were one with everything, and the rent wouldn't be due next week. Reality suspended in a magical mystery tour of experience. And it was really the notion that this was a breakthrough into higher consciousness, a means of realizing one's true self, one's deepest reality. And when you picked up Time magazine or Life magazine, the newspapers, when you turned on the tube, when you would go to a nightclub or a kind of a place where a stand-up comic would do something, there was a focus on drugs. And Meher Baba was the first one to speak out with any authority about the effect of drugs. Bulk of it came in the response to a letter written by Dick Alpert saying, I am convinced this is a path to one's higher self. And Baba wrote a lengthy letter explaining why it was not. And in fact, Baba's comments helped, I would say not just helped, but turned around the psychedelic revolution. For one thing, Dick Alpert dropped out of it and became Baba Ram Dass. Went to India, studied under a guru, tried to meet Baba, but couldn't. He was in seclusion. And Leary became ever more nonsensical. When I came back from India, I had 3 debates with him, one in New York, one in Denver, one in California. The 60s had a heartbeat to them, had a pulse to them that cannot be overlooked. And it's all because what was going on at the time is that Meher Baba was sitting in seclusion in Marazad. And what was he doing in this universal work? He said, you will see my young ones. And Baba then explained that these drugs were not helpful in the search for truth. In fact, they were delusion within illusion and could lead to all the problems that I've described. He sent Robert back and said, spread this message and tell Rick and Allan Cohen was the 3rd member of our musketeers in Boston that had come to Baba at about the same time, to do what you can to see that others get this message, that these drugs are harmful. So Robert came back aglow with his brief but so incredible meeting with Baba. I mean, he was someone our age who had met Baba and came back. And we made some efforts, and the efforts all came to fruition. We gave talks at the college. We gave talks on radio. We wrote some columns and sent them to newspapers, and they got published, and Baba's name was starting to appear in a variety of places, and his message was getting out, and now Leary and Alpert were all agitated that one of the great mystical teachers, the great spiritual leaders that they admired and respected so much, was saying their very own psychedelic drugs were no good. I mean, these guys were the psychedelic gurus of the age.
So we see Rick there telling how important what was happening in the culture at that time, and how important, what a role that it played in Baba's role in all this, and his being in seclusion at this time. And Erich had said that he believed that the deep seclusion work that was being done in that latter period of Baba's advent, the late 60s, was really a way of bringing us to him, that his seclusion work was instrumental in bringing us the younger generation of Westerners who came to him at that time. So another individual who played a pivotal role, particularly because he was such a public figure, was Peter Townsend, the rock star of the group The Who. He became a Baba lover in '67. He learned about Baba from the artist who had done the cover for the rock opera Tommy. I think his name is Mike McHenry, although I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. And he didn't know really about the dangers of drugs that Baba had talked about until he met with, Rick Chapman and Allan Cohen. So Peter ended up writing an article in Rolling Stone. He's probably responsible for the greatest public awareness of Baba because of his popularity as a rock star. And he wrote this article in Rolling Stone magazine, 1967. It was entitled "In Love with Mayor Baba." And it really is quite a well-written article. And in it, he mentions this. He says, "My last dope smoking days." And speaking about what Baba had said about drugs, he says, "It's on this basis that I approach another of Baba's most profound and controversial statements. Drugs are harmful mentally, spiritually, and physically." So the cover of the magazine had Baba's photograph on it, which, as I say, millions of people probably saw. And inside, there were also many photographs of Baba. So this was a real catharsis of bringing Baba's name. It's probably several million people saw the article. Here is a short segment of an interview of Peter Townsend in which he speaks about Meher Baba.
He is God personified. In other words, he is an aspect, a personal aspect of God, and one of the highest aspects of God, in that he is simultaneously God and man, simultaneously a human being, and at the same time, simultaneously, in the beyond God state. This is in a complete state of completely universal consciousness.
And so the other very popular personality who was also spreading Baba's name and message was Richard Alpert, who we saw had gone to India, been with another master, Neem Baba, changed his name to Baba Ramdas, and came back to America and began to tell many people about his experience. And he wrote a book that was quite popular called Be Here Now. And in the book, he mentions Meher Baba several times, including even a drawing of Meher Baba. The book, I think, has sold over 2 million copies from what I've read. Its initial publication was in 1971, but it even remains in print today. I actually got a copy from Amazon to prepare for this talk. So I found a talk that Richard Alpert gave to the Medjinger Foundation around this time. And during that talk, he said, Meher Baba was an Indian holy man who was a very pure statement of bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion, the yoga of love. He is a very high teacher. There's no doubt about that. I've had very powerful spiritual contacts with Meher Baba, and I feel that he is one of my gurus. And he's pointed out to me in correspondence when he was in his body that he thought there was a problem in relation to LSD, that you became addicted to the experience of LSD rather than working for the true reality. I have come to understand what he meant by that. That lecture was given in May of 1970. And as I said, Richard Alpert and Baba Ramdas gave many talks on college campuses and various news and media outlets, and really spread Baba's name often through that process. Not exclusively focused on Baba, but many people heard Baba's name as a result. I actually know some people who are Baba lovers who first learned about Baba by either hearing or reading something of Richard Alpert's. So, I believe that Baba was in many ways fulfillment of the hippie utopian vision. Hippies themselves were kind of the culmination of the counterculture. They had this utopia vision for a new way of life, and many of them were actually trying to live that vision. And as I say, Baba was a fulfillment of that. And the reason I say that is because the vision that the hippies had was based on love and peace and LSD. And hippies believed that we should live in a peaceful, loving way, and that LSD was a way of getting there, and it gave one the spiritual experience that they could see that was what was beyond normal, regular human consciousness. So Baba fulfilled the hippie vision in the following way. In a sense, LSD, which was giving people spiritual experiences, well, Baba said those experiences are not real, they're illusions, but there is such a thing as true spiritual experience, and he outlines that in the discourses and explains that in God Speaks also. And he even, instructed Allan and Rick and Robert when giving talks to refer to these sections of God Speaks and the discourses about the higher planes of consciousness and real spiritual experience. So another aspect of the hippie vision was love. And of course, Baba is the manifestation of divine love. And his main message is love. Love God, love humans. One doesn't progress through the spiritual planes just through meditation and practices of yoga and the like. Baba's emphasis was on love. Love for God, love for the Master, love for Baba. And the other aspect of the utopian vision was peace. No more war. Baba fulfilled that vision of utopian in which there would be no more war through his proclamation of the coming of a new humanity. Regarding the new humanity, Baba said, "The new humanity will bring about a long period of peace. The coming civilization of the new humanity shall be ensouled not by dry intellectual doctrines, but by living spiritual experience. The new humanity will come into existence through a release of love in measureless abundance. And this release of love can come through spiritual awakening brought about by the Masters." In my opinion, Baba's work in the West, focused on spreading his message about the dangers of drugs, really also laid the foundation for a whole new generation of Baba lovers. The reason I say that is because even if someone who became a Baba lover didn't hear directly from Allan Cohen or Rick Chapman or Robert or any of the others who were spreading Baba's messages about drugs, that if you trace back the connection, how they heard, or their connections connection, or their connections back connections, if you trace back the connection, you most likely come back to where it was someone spreading Baba's message about the dangers of drugs. Even if it was seeing the pamphlet God in a Pill, or seeing a little card with Baba's photograph on it, or seeing a poster in a head shop, or seeing Peter Townsend's article in the Rolling Stone, or reading Be Here Now. If you trace any of those things back, who was the person that put the card up? Who was the person that put the poster up? If you trace it back, I believe you get back to the work that Baba was doing. So, also interesting that Baba did this work in the last 2.5 years of his physical advent. He was in deep seclusion for part of this time. And as I mentioned, Erich really felt that this deep seclusion was, Baba was using somehow that spiritual energy to draw people to him. It was a very turbulent time, assassinations, protests, Vietnam War protests, all sorts of different things were happening. The hippies were coming into being. And it was a critical period because his manifestation was nearing, or the dropping of his body was about to occur. And so I believe, and I think Erich expressed this too, that this deep inner work was releasing tremendous spiritual energy into the world. And this work manifested in the West through the counterculture. And as a result, it actually generated much, great public awareness of Baba, in which the whole new generation of young Baba lovers came to him. So I thought it fitting to end with an excerpt from a movie taken in 1967 in Merazad by Louis Van Gasteren, in which Baba expresses to Louis the dangers of drugs and gives his message to Louis about why drugs are not the means towards true spirituality.
And now in India, since ages, there are those who have been used to drugs. They are drug addicts. They are the ones who take ganja. Then they take charas and bhang. And they feel uplifted when they take these drugs, and they see colors and signs, and they feel through their hallucination that they have reached the goal. And that false experience is also not continuous. There's a break in their experience, and that is the reason why it is not real, Baba says. Those who take ganja and drugs, they get uplifted through the drugs, and then in the end they go crazy.
Okay. Jai Baba, everyone.